Yes. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first session of the spring semester in Beyond Dispute, a course from JTS that I will facilitate. Today we have, of course, a very important, and I would say probably goes to the heart of Judaism. It's very, very interesting, and I'm looking forward for our discussion. It really lays out the kind of clearly the two sides that we have: the side that loves and the side that respects, afraid of, in awe of. These are the two sides that we have relationship with God. And I would add to that, we have relationship to anything in our lives, because God is a symbol also to that. But these are the two sides that we have to develop. I would, in our body, if I had to place them, it would be the heart and the mind. And these two are in conversation here today. So I'd like to start with watching the video of Dr. Summers, and he will explain his point of view. I need to share the screen, I guess, yeah? Share screen.
In this session, you'll be studying a debate within the Bible about the nature of the covenant, or brit, between the Jewish people and God. You'll confront questions that come up throughout the Bible. For example, does thinking of the relationship between God and the nation Israel as a covenant or contract, which is to say in legal terms, leave room for more emotional models for imagining this relationship? Will this covenant last forever? What are the political implications of the idea of covenant? Different biblical texts we're going to find answer these questions in different ways. As you go through these texts, you'll see some heated discussions among authors of biblical books about what the covenant means in practical and even military terms, and about whether the covenant is eternal. But before you enter into these debates, I'd like to lay out some bigger questions about the role of covenant in Judaism, because the reason the ancient debates matter is that they allow us to confront wider issues. Many people define Judaism as a religion of law, but I think that we should define Judaism as a religion of love even more than we define it as a religion of law. Every morning and every evening, we Jews recite the Shema, which begins by telling us to love God. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. Two of the greatest sages of the Mishnah, Hillel and Rabbi Akiva, maintained that the essence of the Torah can be found in the verse from Leviticus that reads, "Love your neighbor as yourself." V'ahavta l're'acha kamocha. In other words, both our daily liturgy and our greatest sages emphasize the centrality of love in Judaism. So it's worth asking, what sort of relationship with God does love enable as opposed to law? How does appreciating the role of love in Judaism alter how we understand the practices of Judaism, the rituals, the ethics, the day-to-day details of being Jewish and doing Jewish? In short, what is the relationship between love and law in Judaism, and how does that relationship affect our relationships with God? Now, As we discuss the biblical debates about covenant with these big questions in mind, we are going to find a particular term showing up a good deal, especially when we talk about divine love. That term is grace. This word is not always fully understood, so we should talk about it a little bit. Grace refers to a kindness someone performs for someone else who doesn't necessarily deserve it. To be sure, the word grace has other meanings too, but when theologians use the word grace, what they mean, what we mean, is an unearned blessing, some favor that is unmerited. In a single word, we could just say that grace is just a gift, a present. The love a parent has for a baby is an act of grace. The baby has not done anything to deserve that love, but it's there anyway. Life itself is the result of grace, in this case, divine grace. God gives us the gift of life, even though before we received it, we couldn't possibly have done anything to deserve it. People often think of the idea of divine grace as being a really key concept in Christianity and as less important in Judaism. But I would argue that grace is just as crucial in Judaism, and modern religious Jews would do well to reclaim it. In Western culture, a great many writers and thinkers have tended to assume that the concept of grace doesn't mesh well with the concept of justice. Grace, we're told, lines up with one particular set of values and ideas: mercy, forgiveness, freedom, love. But justice, we're told, lines up with a completely different set of ideas and values: contract, obligation, reward and punishment, law. To some extent, this division between grace and justice, between love and law, makes sense. If you're selling something and I offer you money for it, and then you accept the money, you have a legal obligation to hand over the item. If, on the other hand, you just like me, or love me, or feel connected to me, you can freely turn the item over to me as a gift. It's precisely the fact that you have no obligation to do so that makes your action a gift and not a transaction. So yes, something freely done and something done out of obligation differ. But many Western thinkers have made a mistake in regarding grace and contract, love and law, not merely as different, but as opposed to each other, as natural enemies. That mistake can lead us to overlook a crucial aspect of the Jewish religion, and it needs to be corrected.
Okay, I'm going to stop here for 1 second before we continue with the second part of this video, just to kind of reiterate what Dr. Benjamin Sommer said. It is it's a misconception that Judaism is it's a law based religion. It's not that we're only legal. There's this whole realm of grace that we kind of almost surrendered to the Christian rhetoric, that they kind of experience grace in their religion, but we don't. And that really what he's trying to correct. That's what he was saying. Okay, do you have any comments or questions before we continue? Okay. Yes, Elaine? You have to unmute.
Dr. Sommer said something about grace and a baby, and a baby doesn't deserve grace.
No, it does, but it or he or she did not do anything yet to merit it.
Well,
so,
just being a baby.
And that's why the woman's womb in Hebrew is the same word as mercy, rechem.
Right.
So because women have that compassion to do that.
You love your children no matter what they do. I mean, you'd like to kill them, but you don't.
Exactly. Keep that in mind. This is exactly the title of this session.
No,
I want to kill them, but I don't.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the title for the session. So when we say this on the website, this should be, I want to kill my children, but I don't. That's
Right.
really the point. So there's a
Right.
legally you can kill them because they violated the law. But are you going to do it? No. And that's exactly the angel holding Abraham from slaughtering his son, saying, we don't do that. Our law serves the people, not people to the law, in a sense. That's what separates us from the Christian, at least in the scripture, because Jesus said, what? It's Shabbat for the people or people for the Sabbath. So
Right.
that really angered people. Of course, the Sabbath, you have to keep the law of the Sabbath. Yes, but what if there are mitigating circumstances? What do you do then? So this is the whole point of the love. The love enters in the mitigating circumstances, but what we're also going to see here, that the love is not just one way street. It's both. Our love for God enhances our relationship with everything else. So we'll continue. I'm glad we stopped for a minute here to clarify that, and then we continue with, he's going to explain the different ways to read the Bible according to those philosophies. Share again.
Grace, covenant, obligation, divine law, divine love. We'll be looking in this unit at some fundamental concepts that show up in the Bible. So I'd like to say something about how the authors of the Bible convey their main ideas, about their intellectual style. When we study the core concepts of biblical religion, we need to realize a key difference between ancient Near Eastern texts, such as the Bible, and texts in the Western tradition of thought that goes back to Plato and Aristotle. Western texts often state basic principles and then draw inferences from them deductively. But ancient Near Eastern texts like the Bible tend not to do this. Instead, they communicate key concepts by using terms or images associated with those concepts. Then they mix the terminology or modify the images to compare the concepts. So as we study the texts in this unit, we'll want to watch out for patterns of characters, words, and images that repeatedly connect up with one idea of covenant or another. In the ways our texts go on to allude to those patterns and alter them, they reveal what they're thinking. In short, what I'm saying here is that the biblical authors were concrete where Western philosophers are likely to be abstract. As a result, we students of the Bible need to work inductively to understand what the Bible is trying to teach us about a group of related beliefs, values, and sentiments. One last thing. Jewish culture has long prized discussion, debate, and even argument. The Talmud, famously, consists of a record of disagreements that are hammered out in the rabbis' shaklavataria, their back and forth. And yet, it sometimes comes as a surprise that Israelites in the biblical period could be nearly as devoted to discussing and arguing as their Talmudic successors. In this session, you are going to see that the authors of some parts of the Bible put forward opinions that differ from those expressed by the authors of other parts of the Bible. You'll see that the prophet Jeremiah sometimes argues with another prophet, such as Isaiah, or with authors of the Psalms. The Bible doesn't always speak to us with one voice. Like the Talmud, the Bible is a record of debates, and sometimes what matters in the Bible is the process of discussing an issue rather than coming to a definite conclusion about an issue. Further, like most modern biblical scholars, I don't assume that the whole Torah is by one author. I think that the Chumash, or the Pentateuch, preserves the writings of a variety of ancient sages, priests, Levites, prophets, and scribes. As a religious Jew and a biblical scholar, I believe that we often should look to the Torah not for dogma, not for one simple truth, but rather for guidance about what issues should matter to us as Jews, what issues demand our attention and our discussion. Now that I've laid out these big questions and offered some guidance as to how we can discern core concepts through the Bible's particular way of communicating them and arguing about them, I'd like to invite you to enter some text study together. Let's see how our ancestors and forebears in ancient Israel debated the nature of God's covenant. What is primary, God's law or God's love?
Okay. Before we get to the text, any impressions that you have from studying this material? Yeah, you can unmute. Yeah, Susan?
I don't, I haven't looked at this material yet, but that question that he just asked, I think is not the right question.
Okay. Who asked?
That we just heard on this video, what is primary, God's love or God's law? I think they're inseparable. I don't think we can lift one up above the other. So
Okay.
I think that question is flawed.
Well, I can understand why you think it's flawed, and I would at this point would say, of course, they're inseparable, and to think that you can basically, because what he was saying, the Western philosophy started in the head, right, with ideas, and then started kind of cascading it down to the people with laws. But this is the difference. Judaism, as an ancient Near Eastern society, worked from the heart, basically what he was saying. So these are the two things that we definitely have to combine, because it's no secret that the Hellenistic atmosphere around us influenced us for now millennia. So if they're that strong, then of course they have a place in our conversation. This is almost like the Naaseh v'nishma, when the people received the law in Mount Sinai, they said, we will hear and we will listen, we'll do and we will listen. And the doing is the love, and listen is the hearing, the law, of course. So yes, Anne.
I agree with Susan. He would better have phrased it if he had just simply asked about the relation between them rather than opposing. He opposes them, and that's what we're working against, really.
Of course.
It was not a good ending,
yeah,
in my opinion.
Okay, very good. Miriam?
I have some trouble with the word with love versus law, and I think I'd feel more comfortable with honor versus law. And what does it say that we honor our parents? We don't have to love them. And I think I would rather like someone and respect and honor them rather than having to feel that love is what's important. I'd rather like and be fair and just with the person rather than thinking that love is the most important part of it. It doesn't say love your parents, honor them.
Right, honor your parents, but actually in terms of God, God wants us to love him and to love our neighbor. It's true that we are not commanded to love our parents, but we're commanded to love our neighbor, and a good translation for that in Hebrew is basically anybody you come in contact with, or at least with among your people. So we are commanded to love. Yeah, it's hard to love our parents because we see all their flaws. And so we're not asked to do that, but we're asked to honor them because they represent God in this world. And you write about that they do represent, there is a cross relations between them. But God wants us to go further with him. He wants us to love him. And he tells us that he loves us. So there are some cultures that have an issue with love. It's more about the law. It's more about the order. And some other cultures, if you arrive on time, you insulted the host. That for sure thought you'll come 15 minutes later at least. In some cultures, so it's a different. It is the Eastern and Western philosophies. And I will just end with one comment before we get to the first source, is that the Greek philosophers almost were proud of it, that they're just philosophers. They speak from the mind, and they're not obligated to be ethical people. But Judaism says that it's not like that. What you preach and what you say, it is the way you're supposed to behave. So that's a big difference, because when you only go by law, this is not realistic, right? Societies that have only strict rules and laws will never survive. There's a midrash that says that God created the concept of tshuva before he created the world, because he knew then the first time somebody does something wrong, then they're out of the game. No, that's not the point. The point is to keep the relationship. The relationship, of course, has to come from the mind. You have to be orderly in the relationship. If your husband or wife says to you, please don't put those slippers in front of the door, it's okay. You should respect that. But love is something that is, of course, goes beyond all that. So let's look at the sources. That this is a very interesting chart, because it really summarizes these concepts along our covenant. So basically, there are covenants with individuals and covenants with the group. So associated terms, motif. So when do we see covenant of grace and love, and where do we see covenant of law? So the first time we see that is in the words olam. It's not the first chronologically. They didn't do it chronologically, but recurring vocabulary when we talk about love. It's like saying to someone, I will always love you. I may not stand to be around you, but I will always love you. And love is something that adds on. You don't have to love someone, and then if you love somebody else, you have to let your other side go. So olam le'olam, eternity, forever. It appears in many places in Genesis, and then in Samuel. Samuel, of course, was the last prophet before the kings, before the environment in Israel changes totally from judges to kings. But it is a forever covenant. And then we see, on the other hand, that the words im, or if, that's what it means in Hebrew, then that's conditional. And then Exodus, of course, and Deuteronomy, will get to those places. Mountains, Mount Zion, of course, is where the Temple Mount is. Mount Ararat is the mountain that Noah's Ark rested upon. So here we talk about the humanity, a covenant with humanity, and here it's with a certain nation. And then Mount Sinai, also known as Horeb. Okay, so that's where the law is received, and the law is definitely conditional. And then we go to the characters, Noah, Abraham, and our patriarchs, and then David for the kingship. It's important to kind of put the timeline before and after the kings. So here he's making a covenant with David, with the house of David, but let's not forget that there was King Saul before it, that somehow God took away his kingship. So it is also conditional. Familiar relationship. So this is where we get the idea of parents or a marriage or a partner. So parent-child is definitely love beyond everything. It's not, it's unconditional. And then if the image is a marriage between a husband and wife, that the assembly of Israel, Knesset Israel, is the wife of God, then it's marriage. And then marriage can be broken. You can get divorced, you can move away, and so forth. And the events, the patriarchal age, and the flood, these are the two, when God said, I will never do that again, or I will always be with you. And then the Exodus, Egypt, the giving of the 10 Commandments. Of course, there, everything is conditional. If you abide by my law, then you will have ample rain and so forth. Okay. All right. So I'm not going to refer to people by Chavruta, well, just per individual. So Susan, would you like to start us off with the first source? You can read it in English, please.
When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am El Shaddai. Walk in my ways and be blameless. I will establish my covenant between me and you, and I will make you exceedingly numerous. Abram threw himself on his face, and God spoke to him further. As for me, this is my covenant with you. You shall be the father of a multitude of nations, and you shall no longer be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham. For I make you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fertile and make nations of you, and kings shall come forth from you. I will maintain my covenant between me and you and your offspring to come as an everlasting covenant throughout the ages, to be God to you and to your offspring to come. I assign the land you sojourn in to you. I assign the land you sojourn in to you and your offspring to come, all the land of Canaan, as an everlasting holding. I will be their God. Okay.
Wow. Thank you for the reading. What is your sense about this? Clearly, it's a text that it depicts love, because it has all the I will always be with you forever, everlasting. What do you think about this, Susan? How do you feel about this text?
I think it's a perfect example of covenant, promise, love, law, all mixed into one thing.
Okay, but it's not rational.
Does it have to be?
And that is the question. That's the question. So when I look back at Jewish history and my own life, one of the main reasons I am a faithful person is because I know for sure, if there's one thing I know in my life of almost 50 years of being on this planet, that I couldn't do certain things by myself. There is no way I could achieve or I could do or be certain things that I am or have or did without some help. And that help came always at the time when I needed it, when I thought that's it, it's the end of the rope, and something came up. That's the love. I knew they couldn't be more coincidences. So when you look back at Jewish history and you see that the Jewish people came back to that land, God always, somehow we were in communication with God, not always in loving communication, but some people always maintain that. But look at that, our history, and you look back, and what is that? Can that be only rational? Of course not. We wouldn't be here if it was all rational.
Well, what this opens up for me, and I don't think we necessarily should stop and think about what I'm going to say, but I think we need to think about what God means to each of us, what our idea of God is. And that to me is part of the purpose of the course. Now, I know we want to go through the sources, but I think that's an important conversation, and one that a lot of us and Jews in general don't want to really talk about and get down to brass tacks. What is God to you? I mean, this forced me to think about that personally.
Do you want to start then?
No, I don't want to get us onto that. Really, I know we want to go through the sources.
So, okay, so
but
have that
I mean,
in
I
mind.
could say briefly what
Please
it
do.
means to me. I had this discussion with you where I said I didn't exactly agree with you. Not exactly agree with you. I plain didn't agree with you, because God for me is an abstract idea. And I can't say what God is. I can only say what God is not. And for me, but the abstract idea is crucial, because there's the one thing that's been always very appealing to me is the idea that we are all created in the image of God, which means to me that God is a part of me, that God is in some sense part of me. And
would you say
that
your
requires me, what?
Would you say your soul is the part
I don't
of God?
separate, my soul, spirit, my essence, my values. I don't know what word I would use.
Yeah.
But consequently, I have responsibilities because of the gift of life, given the gift of life, and the fact that I am in the image of God. That necessitates responsibilities on my part.
Which is amazing, because you don't believe in the personal providence, and this is where we differ, right? You and I differ, I guess. And so I believe in personal providence, and I came to see it because of all these coincidences that I had. So, but you don't. So, but you still are compelled to be an ethical person without even thinking that someone is watching you.
Yes.
That's amazing. I don't know how what are the numbers in your nuanced group, because you clearly you're a faithful person, and to a large degree, you think that God is part of you. I can't see more faith than that. But
the idea is part of me.
Whatever it is,
the idea represents something. Yes,
you're there, definitely in the mind, but in terms of the supervision, you don't have that part, which many people who have that notion that God is part of them, also it usually comes with the other notion that God is also watches over us, for good or for bad. But you don't have that part, and yet you still have the self disciplines to be an ethical and upstanding citizen in your society. So that's incredible. Yes, Alan.
But couldn't an atheist be an ethical person as well? The fact that they don't believe in God doesn't mean that they're unethical. They could be ethical.
Clearly, but Anne does not belong to that group of atheism.
Right.
And that's the interesting part of it. Yes. Okay, so let's continue with the next, unless Judy, yes, please. Only you'll have to unmute.
What is El Shaddai? It came up right at the top, and I don't understand what that means.
So El Shaddai, it's one of the names of God. Shaddai is one of the names of God, just like we have, Adonai, Elohim, different names, Shalom, there's different names for God. So El Shaddai, the God of Shaddai, something, Shaddai. So there are different interpretations of the word Shaddai. One of them, and the most common, is the guardian of the doors of Israel. And that's why all the mezuzahs normally, most mezuzahs would have those three letters, Shaddai, which stands for Shomer Daltot Israel, the guardian of the doors of Israel. So, of course, we don't attribute God different personalities that way. You know, oh, one day he's a Shaddai, one day he's a Elohim, one day no. But these are different aspects of God that we as human beings interpret. For God, there's no separation between anything, but we make those distinctions. Yes, Sarah?
This conversation today reminds me of a conversation I had with Stanley Rubin once, some years ago. And it was a question of the fear of God. And he gave the example of, let's say you know that some friend or relative has included you in his or her will, and that you will inherit $1 million upon this person's death. Now, you desperately want to have this money, right? So you could go to that person's house with a gun and off him or her, and then you would be the recipient of this $1 million. And yet, we're not going to do that because
many Columbo episodes are based on this premise.
Well, you know, Stanley made quite a deal of it that, you know, I guess agnosticism comes into this, or atheism, you know, whatever your feeling is, but that you don't go and shoot the person who's going to leave you the $1 million because there's a fear of God, and maybe. So I think that enters into this discussion as well.
Yeah. Okay. And I would add God under the same category, the police. Which means a governing power.
Well, let's assume that the person who goes to the house with the gun to collect the $1 million is smart and knows how to get away with it. But even if you get away with it, I think that was Stanley's point. You could get away with it,
right?
But you can't get away with it with God.
Exactly. Yeah, and that is a very powerful tool in every faith, you know. And if we concentrate on just the Abrahamic faith, it's of course that power of coercion is central, you know, in Christianity and Islam. Judaism used to have that phase, and we grew out of it, and we understand maybe some communities still have that power of coercion that is powerful on both ends. But do we want to live like that? I personally can't. So, but the power of persuasion we definitely have. And that's really the power that we have. It's to persuade people. And that's a good segue in continuing to persuade you with the next paragraph. Okay, so we can, okay, good. We have to read the second paragraph here because it completes the first one, because we have a condition on our side here. Okay, let's see. Elaine, would you please read that paragraph after you unmute? I guess this was what you were afraid of, that you would be called on.
God further said to Abraham, "As for you, you and your offspring to come throughout the ages shall keep my covenant. Such shall be the covenant between me and you and your offspring to follow, which you shall keep. every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and that shall be the sign of the covenant between me and you. And throughout the generations, every male among you shall be circumcised at the age of 8 days. As for the homeborn slave and the one brought from an outsider who is not of your offspring, they must be circumcised, homeborn and purchased alike. Thus shall my covenant be marked in your flesh as an everlasting pact. And if any male who is uncircumcised fails to circumcise the flesh of his foreskin, that person shall be cut off from his kin. He has broken my covenant.
Okay, wow. I will stop sharing for a minute because this is an important conversation. So what do we have here? After we had the unconditional commitment of God to Israel, all of a sudden to Abraham and to his future generation, all of a sudden there is a condition. There's something that we need to follow, the covenant. So we don't know the full extent of the covenant right now that he's referring to, but at least one thing is very specific there, right? He just started a new startup, 34,000 years ago. I have an idea. How about this? And the first Mohel school started. So, this is not only it's a condition, it's a clear mark that I belong to this side. So to say, like Professor Sommer said, the conversations that we're introducing beyond dispute are to define some boundaries in Judaism and have conversation when you have a community. But and he says, they're not so much to find a dogma. It's really to have for the sake of the conversation itself. Well, yes and no. Yes, because we value the conversation itself, absolutely, and that's why we're here too. But there is such a thing, even if we don't call it dogma in Judaism, that puts you outside the boundaries. And this is important to take a minute to explain the history of this. We lived for many centuries now in the context of Christianity and Islam. Before that, we didn't really have a really strong need to define who we are. This is who we were. But when we started having our relationship with people that we viewed as relatives in some way or another, the Christianity and Islam, then we had to put the boundaries also where we were. So they clearly laid out dogmas, and they have, of course, every century they have another, the council, and they decide dogmas. And for the Islamic world, they have something, and I'm not sure what it is exactly, but they have their process of laying out dogmas. In Judaism, really it started with first century when Christianity also started coming up. But it really was codified by medieval rabbis, and the most famous article about it is of Maimonides. It's called the 13 Principles. And it's very, very important to know this for this conversation, that we do have boundaries around Judaism. So love can take you, of course, infinitely, but the law part of it can take you out of the community. And maybe now it doesn't mean that much, but in Jewish history, getting somehow not belonging to the community was a terrible sentence. So, and it is the karet, the idea of the being cut off, is here or in heaven, are very, common, the use of the language was very common about it in the Torah. Okay, so let's continue with the next view. But
Rabbi,
actually, yes, there is a question to be asked here now. Elaine, yes.
yes. Do you think the fact that baby boys had to be circumcised caused any trouble for Jews even to this day? I mean, it's a novel idea.
It-
I mean, you think about it.
Well,
I mean,
there were other cultures that did that.
I am not, I'm
I-
sure.
I have no idea.
It never comes out of kind of a vacuum, but I'm not familiar with a community that did it to define who they
Not,
were.
yeah, not to do,
Yeah.
not
so
in the same
that
way.
really is the brit, the first brit that we have is the circumcision, because that Abraham does it, and he's the first Jew. So that's where the boundary is. Yeah.
When you think about it, I mean, following up with Elaine's wonderful comment, why remove a part of the penis? What about making a little notch in your ear, where, you know, or a little tattoo, or a little something on your nose, put a ring in your nose? I mean, why did we choose to take a piece of the foreskin removed?
It certainly eliminates all women from being.
Yeah, eliminates all women, that's for sure.
Yeah. So there is no answer to that.
Hmm.
I mean, there are different explanations after the fact that it could be healthy, it could be a mark, and maybe it's not a necessary part of the body. Whatever the explanations are for this matter, it doesn't actually make a difference, because we are doing it as an act of love for God. Enter the covenant. So you can't enter the covenant, just like with marriage. You're not entering a covenant because your spreadsheets fit, right? Maybe some people do that. I feel sorry for them, but it would be out of love first, right? First, you have to love the person, something that would be beyond anything in particular. You're becoming one flesh in the person and in, figuratively. So you have to love them, because it's not about if he's gonna or she's gonna do this or that. It's over. That's the whole point of marriage, is to go through those differences. So that's the entrance. The circumcision is an act of love. We cannot explain that. So that is on our end. And then once we're in it, then there are rules to follow. So okay, so how does that change? That one of the questions we asked in the email. How does that change your then view of the mitzvot? That now that you know that how important the love factor in the relationship with God is for Judaism. It's not a foreign idea for us. And I'll introduce an important concept in Jewish halakha, the law. Yes.
It doesn't, for me, it's asking a lot of a person. And the poor baby has no choice in the matter whatsoever.
Okay, what does that tell you about, are we savages, or are we, there's something that we understand that is
This is
more
part
important?
of the cultural framework of the period. It's not, it's interesting that it lasts until today.
And
in
it's
fact.
the most, right, adhered to law, even among secular Jews. It's incredible. The circumcision, and I think Passover is like right after that. Yeah, Miriam?
I just wonder how many completely secular Jews have lost their lives because they've been identified by the circumcision.
a lot.
Jews who had no relationship with faith at all with God, and yet that defining mark cost them their lives.
Being Jewish was always was in one way or another you had to be identified by clothing, by language, by, the Talmud says the reason that the Israelites were saved from Egypt was because they, first of all, of course, God's love, and he wanted to take them out, but those who were identifiable because they kept their clothing, their names, and their language. Very important thing. So we always were identifiable. In Yemen, when the Muslims wanted to identify Jews, they said, grow the sideburns, and that became simonim, literally means signs. So we're always identifiable. So it's always risky to be Jewish. And that's part of that. But I think, and just we'll conclude to that, is the circumcision is so important because we're not asking you, because we know that you can't live in this world without a community. And that's more important. You need to be part of a community. And that's, of course, we never know all the reasons for circumcision, but definitely it identifies our community. Yes, Anne?
I think all these questions are important, but we're still on source 1 and it's 12:35. I want to move us along a little bit. And what this tells me is that we really want to talk about these things.
Absolutely. That's really,
I'm a little concerned that we're not going to get to some of the
okay.
that we're not moving along quite.
Okay. So do you want to, can you see the text now?
No.
No. Okay. Let me share that. Okay, so let's move to the love sections that we're commanded. Okay, and what do you think? Do you want to do the source with David?
Where are you?
Yeah, we will have to move this along because, but let's read the Deuteronomy 11.
Okay, yeah, I think that's more important.
That's the section from the Shema that we read in pretty much every service. So this way we can have maybe a few minutes to look at the language. So, okay, so who here studied this source that is here now? Either way, this is a source we can just do together. Alan,
Sarah, and I don't know if you had a chance to study it, but I think this is part of what you had. And I don't mean to call on, put the,
No, I read it. Did I study it? Did I?
Well,
then I did. I read the sources.
So how about if you read it, please read it out loud. This is one of the paragraphs of the Shema, and actually this is the paragraph that we do not say out loud, and I'll explain after that.
You'd like me to read it, Rabbi?
Yes, please.
Okay. Love, therefore, the Lord your God, and always keep his charge, his laws, his rules, and his commandments. If then you obey the commandments that I enjoin upon you this day, loving the Lord your God and serving him with all your heart and soul, I will grant the rain for your land in season, the early rain and the late. You shall gather in new grain and wine and oil. I will also provide grass in the fields for your cattle, and thus you shall eat your fill. Take care not to be lured away to serve other gods and bow to them, for the Lord's anger will flare up against you, and he will shut up the skies so that there will be no rain, and the ground will not yield its produce, and you will soon perish from the good land that the Lord is assigning to you.
Okay, we can't finish here. Please read just the next paragraph.
Therefore, impress these my words upon your very heart. Bind them as a sign on your hand, and let them serve as a symbol on your forehead. And teach them to your children, reciting them when you stay at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up. And inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates, to the end that you and your children may endure in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers to assign to them, as long as there is a heaven over earth.
Wow. Okay, so one is very conditional and one is unconditional. But what God is telling us here, and this is what we're been talking about, the first one was V'ahavta, and therefore you should love your God, all your heart and everything. And then a conditional, if you synchronize with God, God will synchronize with you, that you get the rain in its proper time. That's really the key in all that. We don't read this out loud in synagogues. There are three traditions in reading text: the Ashkenazi, Sephardi, and Yemenite. And this Ashkenazim, the Ashkenazi Jews don't read it at all. The whole paragraph is silent because we don't want to read that the verse 17, that God will be angry at us and we will lose the land. So they just don't read all the whole paragraph. Sephardi Jews don't read only those paragraphs, these three verses, and the Yemenites read everything out loud. So that's the different traditions. But this is the key to both conditional and not conditional. Have these signs that would tell you if you cross the boundary or not always. But at the end of the day, I'm always going to be there and watch over you. So I want to introduce one concept very important in halakha, in Jewish law, that is beforehand and after the fact. The milechatchila v'bedieved. These are very important two words, because what they mean, and this is how also we started, that God created the world, according to the Midrash, after he created the concept of tshuva, the way to return. So if you, let's say, violated the law, a forbidden commandment, you violated it, there is the before and after. So if beforehand you were supposed to die, right? You do this, if you violate the Sabbath, you die. But after the fact, there are many mitigating circumstances and certain things that after the fact you get the punishment, but you also get the reward for. For example, marriage. If you're not supposed to marry someone, let's say you're a Kohen and she's a divorcee, you can't marry her, but if you marry her after the fact, your marriage is valid. You may not serve as a Kohen now in the temple, but your marriage is valid. So there's always the before and after, and that's the part of the love that God always wants to bring us back and not cut us off when we violate the law. Okay. Anybody here has a comment? We can continue.
Rabbi, it's like the carrot and the stick. God tells us all wonderful things, and then, but if you don't, you'll be sorry.
Yeah, wait until your dad comes home.
Right. There's nothing going your way.
Yeah.
It's all his way.
So I do want to ask you before we continue, Jeremiah, who here, I mean, relates to God more on the law side, and who's on the love side?
I don't think about the law at all. because I stay within the law.
Wow.
That's
Says
really
one.
interesting.
Wow, it really is
I
interesting.
don't.
Wow.
So for you, it's love.
It's love. Funny love, but it's
But
not the
you
law.
stay within the law too.
I
So
stay
you
within the law.
don't have to worry about the law if you stay within the law.
Even in my real life, I stay within the law.
Wow. I think you're, fortunate that the law, you were able to stay within the law. For most people, they have to violate the law one way or another in their lives. And that's where the interesting conversations, theologically, spiritually, and all begin, is where you kind of have to cross the law somehow. Yes, Susan?
I think the law is love. And even ever how much we choose to stay in it or not, or are able to stay in it or not, I think it's designed to create boundaries and a safe space for us and a way not to have to worry about certain things. And I think that is love.
Yeah, Alan?
I'll give you a good example in our synagogue. We do Zoom, and you could argue that violates the law. But because we're bringing everyone in, that's love. So isn't that a better trade-off for our synagogue?
Wow, I think it's a great example.
That's good.
Yeah, very good example. So I would, yes, even if it violated the law, just like driving the car, I would say specifically in the Zoom, I don't even know if it violates the law that much. I mean, it's not really, it's not that big of a deal actually in terms of the violating the law. Even in the stricter communities, they realize that one of the main reasons they don't apply Zoom is just because it's not their tradition and they don't want to introduce something new into their service. But halachically, it would be easy to kosher it.
But it depends because if the Orthodox community don't accept a lot of things that conservatives have accepted, driving, turning on lights, etc. Just because our sect has accepted it, that doesn't mean the law has changed. That means our interpretation has changed for the convenience of modern times. So you could still argue that not following it the way the Orthodox follow it is still violating the law. What our sect said, we're making exceptions for the community based upon modern times in order to keep the religion flourishing.
Yeah, for sure. No, definitely. That premise is agreeable. No doubt about that. Okay, so yes.
I just want to say, if you think about Hatzolah, they're out on Shabbos, Yom Kippur, every holy day in the Jewish calendar, saving lives. But there are still very religious Jews who wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
But these guys go out.
Yeah, so definitely the love.
The violation.
The love.
I don't think it's a violation, but
right, exactly the point. That's what when Susan says that she thinks the law is love, and I agree with definitely. I agree with it, but I agree with it. I would say the law is built around love. I would define it that way, which I think we mean kind of the same, but it means that the Jewish law is already within its essence, is built to accommodate relationship of love. It's not just when we do eye for an eye, we don't really go and take people eyes out. We really say, okay, you can supplement it or exchange it with money. Yes, Miriam and Adrian.
I think in trying to follow the law, stay within the law, for me it would be more a sense of gratitude. And how could I stray? How could I do this when I've been gifted with so much it's just a way to thank. It's such gratitude for what we have. I have. How could you, go again? Try not to go against that.
Right, right.
Hmm.
Well, that's good. Well, because you've already crossed to the other side, as we say. Hebrew, the word Hebrew, Ivri, when Abraham was called Abram the Hebrew, because it comes from Ivri, and one of the understanding of the word Ivri, Hebrew, is to cross to the other side, other Ever, which means that Judaism introduced here a new paradigm of loving thy neighbor, not competing with thy neighbor, not taking thy neighbor's land. So that's the, when you see someone destitute, you help them. You don't take advantage of him. That's the paradigm that we've introduced. So let's go to one more, at least one more source here from Jeremiah. So Jeremiah lived before and during the exile of the 10 tribes in the north, the kingdom of Israel. And now he is concerned for Judah, for the destruction of the temple. And so before that, and he sees also those people who exiled. And this is before the destruction, or let's say active during the period, yes, exactly, before the destruction, right? So this is what he is warning about. Was there somebody here from the Chavrutas that study this source? Yes, Anne?
Yes. You want me to read Jeremiah 2?
Just read it, Jeremiah, the source.
Oh, okay.
5, yeah.
The word of the Lord came to me, saying, "Go proclaim to Jerusalem, thus said the Lord, I accounted to your favor the devotion of your youth, your love as a bride, how you followed me in the wilderness, in a land not sown. Israel was holy to the Lord, the first fruits of his harvest. All who ate of it were held guilty. Disaster befell them, declares the Lord. Even after she had done all this, I thought she would come back to me, but she did not. That faithless woman, her sister, saw it. She saw too that I had put apostate Israel away and given her a certificate of divorce because she had committed adultery. Yet that faithless woman, her sister Judah, was not afraid. She too went and committed adultery. She defiled the land with her casual prostitution and her adulterous worship of stone and wood. In spite of all this, Judah, that faithless woman, has not come back to me in sincerity, but only in pretense."
Okay, it's hard to stop here, the reading, but what it means is that we're shifting now the relationship from a parent-child to a spouse. That in most prophets, Israel and God are spouses, and usually the Knesset Israel, the Assembly of Israel, is the wife, and God is the husband. And she, by worshiping idols, basically committed an adultery, and God divorced her. But he's saying, of course, it's God will always bring us back, because why? Here it is. The word of the Lord came to me, saying, "Go proclaim to Jerusalem. Thus said the Lord, I accounted to your favor the devotion of your youth, your love as a bride, how you followed me in the wilderness in a land not sown." So this will always bring us back to the love, that even when it's spouses, not parent-child, that is unconditional, it somehow will always bring us to that moment, because you cannot take away that moment from lovers. It's like in Casablanca, the movie Casablanca, we'll always have Paris, right? So, we'll always have that moment that nobody can take away from us. Even if other moments then happen, we can always go back to that. So either way, we see on both ends that there's a legal aspect, conditional aspect, but there's always love that is surrounding all that. Yes, Anne?
What's interesting to me about this is that the last paragraph, she defiled the land with her. In spite of all this, Judah isn't, that there's pain. The God who is speaking is in pain from this.
Yes.
So that you can't be in pain unless you have given love, I think.
Wow, that's very
Really,
good.
I
I can finish that thought for you, because the word love in Hebrew means to give. And whatever we give to, whatever giving is, tangible or non-tangible, but you give something, then you have part of you in it. So, and that's the love, that you see your part in it. So whatever you love, you give, and whatever you give to, clearly you love. So good. So he's in pain, of course. He gave us a lot. He created us. He brought us out of Egypt. He nurtured us, and we betray him. In Isaiah, it starts by the relationship of children and parents. It says, and God said, even donkeys know where their food is and who gives them, nurtures them.
I'll call you back. I can't talk right now. I'll call you later.
Okay, so we can do, you can unmute, and we can move to the next, well, we have only 5 minutes. I would probably hold off on this next
Well,
source. What do you think?
well, this, because I had this source, I want to talk about it because I think
please, go ahead.
it really reflects what Susan was saying.
Mhm.
Going to the last paragraph, thus said the Lord of hosts, keep going. Okay, the God of Israel, mend your ways and your actions, and I will let you dwell in this place. Don't put your trust in illusions and say the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord are these buildings. No, if you really mend your ways and your actions, if you execute justice between one man and another, if you do not oppress the stranger, the orphan, and the widow, if you do not shed the blood of the innocent in this place, if you do not follow other gods to your own hurt, then only will I let you dwell in this place, in the land that I gave to your fathers for all time. See, you are relying on illusions that are of no avail. Will you steal and murder and commit adultery and swear falsely and sacrifice to Baal and follow other gods whom you have not experienced, and then come and stand before me in this house which bears my name and say, we are safe to do all these abhorrent things? Do you consider this house which bears my name to be a den of thieves? As for me, I have been watching, declares the Lord. What we in our Havruta discussed was the fact that, first of all, the things that God is asking of us, he's asking us to love and care for all these people, the stranger, the orphan, the widow, the innocent.
Right.
He's asking us to love. And he's in conversation with us. So to me, law, as Susan said, the two, love and law, are totally intertwined. Law is evidence of the love.
I would agree with that.
So that's all I had to say.
And I think that's what the Judaism brought to the world. The love and the law, or the law and the love, however you want to phrase it, but the love and the law go hand in hand. Yeah. Yes, you had your hand up.
This idea for me is completely implicit in Judaism. It's built in. It's not, and I feel like we're always trying to explain this because Christianity took these ideas that were implicit in Judaism and turned them on their heads and put them against each other and claimed the love part when it's not true. It's
Right.
not, but when I feel like that we have to learn this and embody this in ourselves so that we're not always trying to counteract or contradict what Christians are saying about it.
It's interesting. It's very funny because when I went to Yeshiva University, and one of the rabbis was a very prominent rabbi, we always would give examples how we're not Christianity. And for me, growing up in Israel, the context did not include Christianity. I didn't grow up, I didn't know Christians around me. So knew Muslims, of course, and Arabs who were Christian and Muslims, but it's really so different. So I didn't have that. So I in the beginning, I thought, why is he comparing us? Who cares, that way?
Right.
But then, of course, what I do today, I understand the symbiotic relationship and also not symbiotic relationship, but close relationship that Judaism and Christianity, especially rabbinic Judaism, that was born with Christianity. So we have very tight relationship. And so whether we want to admit it or not, we need to be in conversation with him. So I'm more forgiving, of course, to him now. But back then, it really felt like I don't care what Christianity thinks. But to understand fully Judaism, especially in the next 2000, the last 2,000 years, you have to be in conversation with Christianity and Islam, of course. They're both religions. So it is 1 p.m. and I think we'll stop here. I think this was a fascinating and very enjoyable conversation. It had its rules, but it had its love too. And I think we got a good balance here. Anne, you want to tell us something?
No, I just want to clarify the email I'm going to send out, but I'll clarify
Okay, so
that.
let me stop the recording, and then we can.
And I do want to say something about next week. If you guys thought this was hard, I don't want to turn anyone off, but wow, the Maimonidean controversy, those sources are really hard to read, but there are not so many of them. So
I think we're still recording.